Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to be great and dominate.
Well, all right. Welcome back in Operation Domination. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mater, joined here with the full crew, Adam LaRue and Chase Thornton. Guys, we are 1 week away from the NFL draft, and the three amigos that you see on your screen right here or listening to on your podcast are going to be hosting the first round stream for the Fantasy Sports Advice Network next week, which will be a live show at FF Advice. So make sure you tune in, subscribe, and chat it up with us. You can treat it as a watch party however you want. We're going to be diving into all of it, not just fantasy, but of course we'll have a focus on fantasy, and we'll have some betting, and maybe I'll try to get some Dr. Brian Scott on there to talk a little injuries too in the pre-show. So we are going to go live about a half hour before the NFL draft. So tune in about 7:30 Eastern, and we'll be able to take it away from there all through the first round. And we will be back, or at least FSAN will be back for the second and third round on Friday. You'll probably see us pop in, but that'll be Mike Grindberg and Biggs, the boys from Fantasy Forecast, hosting that part of the draft stream. So lots to look forward to as we finally gear up to see where these guys are actually going to land. So make sure you go back and check out Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app and on FF Advice Net YouTube channel, because we talked about quarterbacks, we talked about running backs, we talked about wide receivers, and now we need to get in to the tight end position. And while it may not be the same depth class that it was from a season ago, there are some very interesting names, I think, within the top 5 or 6 that we're going to get into quite a few of them here today. But like we started off the other episodes, I want to talk a little archetype, right? Now, again, we use these mostly as tiebreakers, but I also like to use this as an opportunity to create what baseline fantasy football productive tight ends typically look like and have looked like over the past 10 years when I studied this data in my model. So kind of like the wide receivers, there was 4 archetypes that wound up showing themselves. You have the detached move tight end. You have the hybrid tight end. You have the traditional inline tight end, and then you have the athletic freak tight end. All right, so what do those archetypes mean in particular? Well, the top one, as far as for fantasy football purposes and a general hitting type of notion, would be the featured move tight end. And that really shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. Run. They typically detach from the line of scrimmage 45% or more of the time in the slot or out wide. Their pass block rate is usually under 14%. Again, also makes sense. You want them blocking less and going on routes more often. So all that kind of plays into each for that type of archetype. Would positive example be at the top of that tree? We got a Brock Bowers who would fit that category. We have Sam Laporta who fit that category. Play party of the down passing, they're going to detach from the line of scrimmage and act more so as a slot receiver, but are good enough in line that they don't get necessarily taken off the field. The hybrid tight end is that type, that bucket just below it. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to give you guys the actual buckets of where these guys finished. 33% of that archetype of the feature move tight end finishes as the elite tight end group. 22% finishes as a tight end 1. 11% will finish as a tight end 2, and 33% will bust out, meaning falling outside the top 24 tight ends. Now let's dive into the hybrid part of this. So the hybrid tight end is going to line up on the line of scrimmage a little bit more often, but still is going to detach from the line of scrimmage a good amount of time too, so they'll still be a passing weapon. We're usually looking more for an inline rate somewhere between 40 and 65%. They have like a 15% or more target share. They have about a 1.8 yards per route run, and their pass block. So what are examples that actually stick out like this? Well, the biggest one at the top of this particular tree would be like a Trey McBride. So he lines up on lines scrimmage a little bit more often than Brock Bowers would or Sam Laporta would. However, he is still very much a prime target for his team. So you get a little bit of both there with a Trey McBride type as a hybrid tight end. Then we get to the least fantasy archetype, which is the inline traditional tight end. And the rate in which these guys hit, you're talking under 10% as a tight end 1 period. And you're talking an 80% bust rate where they finish outside the top 24 tight ends. Basically, the only pathway for an inline, well, 2 pathways, I should preface this by. 2 pathways for an inline heavy traditional tight end to be fantasy relevant. 1, they have to be a unicorn, in the sense of they're a freak athlete and a free pass catcher, even though they typically line up on the line of scrimmage. Or 2, they have to have an aberration touchdown type of season. Those are the 2 ways. So what is an example that you can look for to say, okay, well, this would be the positive example for this? George Kittle. And we would look at George Kittle as an exception to this archetype with the way he hits, because not many tight ends line up the end line of scrimmage, block the way that he does, and still can be the weapon that he is. It's why I still look at George Kittle as the best tight end in the NFL. We'll see how it comes back from the Achilles, but that's why he's the best tight end in the NFL, because I don't see anybody who can have more of an all-around game than George Kittle does, and they're very, very difficult to find. Last but not least in this case, the athlete first projected developmental type of tight end. They actually hit 15% of the time inside that tight end 1 bucket total, 5% of the time as an elite tight end. It's 70% bust rate. So second highest as far as volatility goes, but it hits a little bit more than that traditional inline tight end does. What makes a big time athlete tight end, but not necessarily a polished tight end? Well, they typically don't have a great target share. Right, we're talking like under 12%. They typically don't have great yards per route run. Basically, what it boils down to, their production as a receiver is not fantastic, but they jump out of the gym. They run super fast. You love everything about them. They have the size and this and that. Think Albert O as an example to this. Think Jelani Woods as an example to this archetype. 2 guys that completely missed, but we were super happy about, got super pumped about, thought they could be sleepers because they were freak tight ends. There is a positive example, though, and that positive example is Darren Waller. So that would be an athletic tight end first who wasn't super productive coming out. He was a wide receiver coming out. That's part of why. But he's the one who kind of threaded that needle as an athlete first tight end who wound up being fantasy relevant. And, of course, a lot of his off-the-field issues is why he didn't necessarily hit year over year over year. So it's a lot I just threw at you guys, but just piggybacking off the athlete first tight end real quick, as we'll take this as foreshadowing. It's a little bit why I maybe am a little bit worried about Kenyon Sadiq, but we can get into that as we actually get into the tight end conversation. First, I want to kick it to you guys. Are these archetypes that you agree with? Do you disagree with anything? Are these the types of tight ends that you do target when it comes to fantasy football in the order of which I laid out for you guys? Go ahead, Adam and Chase.
Yeah, if anything, I think these extremes are going to push further to the directions they're going in the next couple of seasons. Just the way that the league is trending right now, right? Where 12 rate and multi-tight end sets are the highest they've been since, I believe, 2007, kind of depending how you decide to track it. It's between 25 and 30%. That functionally just depends on if you're including jumbo goal line sets or not. If you are, then it's closer to a third of the plays. And if you're not, then it's like a fourth. But either way, teams are using 2 tight end sets or playing 21 and 22 things where they're using a fullback, like the highest they've been in almost 20 years. And all of that having been said, they're using it in a much different way than they used to. It's not like we have 2 inline big blocker dudes, like, and we're trying to develop the running game like they did in the 2000s, right? Like, that's not the way that they're using these 2 tight end sets. It's all right. They functionally just replaced the slot receiver that we had 5-7 years ago with a tight end slot, with your Harold Fannons, with some of these other guys. The Browns actually ran 12, the highest rate in the league this past season. This is like where this use case is coming from. So I think that move tight end, the guy who's a tight end on the depth chart, but is like playing the slot 60% of the time and kind of, touches in line every once in a while. Like, I think that is the type of guy. And the guys who are getting in the backfield, right? Like the 49ers, if I'm not mistaken, ran 22, like 10% of the time this past season. Like, I think ways you're getting that second extra athletic body who can be a receiver, who can do other things for you, is the highest it's ever been. So like when we started this show, like a handful of years ago, we would often avoid the guys who were not necessarily the greatest at blocking, who might get taken off the field in certain downs. Because at that time, teams wanted the versatile tight end who could do both, because they were playing 3 wide receiver sets and they're playing 1 tight end most of the time. That has completely shifted, where I think it's very specialized right now, where your move tight end is the one who is getting a bulk of the receiving load, because there is also a blocking tight end on the field. And they're not mixing and matching that very much. I mean, sometimes in the red zone, we kind of saw that with the Rams, who, by the way, ran 30% of the time. 3 tight ends, 30% of the time. But we saw that with them, where like their blocking tight ends would get really utilized in the red zone, but wouldn't have a lot of receiving work. And this is exactly that, right? Like, you can be really creative with who you're letting out, especially when the spaces collapse a little bit, and that speed that or lack thereof that you're getting out of the blocking tight ends doesn't matter nearly as much in the confined spaces. But nonetheless, I think that it's really specialized right now. So I think you need the specialist tight ends. So like, for example, I'll allude to this right now. There's a guy in this class who is going to be drafted really highly, and I think as an NFL player deserves to be drafted very highly, but I don't think is going to be very effective for what we do. And I'll just leave it there for right now. But I think the specialization is at the highest it's been, since I've been an NFL fan, like for the tight end position. I think it very much so matters what you are good at, because you're going to do that and probably not much else. I don't think like the generalist tight end who does it all. I think Kittle might be kind of the last in that lineage for at least a little bit. It'll always come back. It's always a pendulum, but like it might be it for a couple of years.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that. Go ahead, Chase.
No, I got a couple things. One, you ever take those, like, those cosmopolitan quizzes where it's like, oh, what kind of whatever are you, right? From Cosmo magazine or whatever. Or my wife, she did the what Harry Potter house quiz are you online, and she gave it to me and she gave it to my kids, whatever. But a lot of times those come out where it's like there's like a range, or like, oh, you're 49% this and 51% that, or you're 63% this and 37%. I think it's possible to be that freak athlete, but still fit into one of those other 3 in terms of the role that you run. And I mean, and that might be kind of a sound obvious, but I think it still bears repeating. I mean, think about Kyle Pitts was supposed to change the whole paradigm of what a tight end was, because he was such a great athlete. Well, I mean, he also, they use him as a receiver. He gets out, moves around. They don't necessarily block with him a ton, because why would you?
Just clarify real quick on the archetype. So you can absolutely be a part of both, but like Kyle Pitts, the phenomenal example. And the thing with Kyle Pitts is that you have to remember these archetypes are broken down not just by your athleticism, but by your production profile. Kyle Pitts had a featured move type of profile. So in order for you to fall into the athletic freak bucket, but be looked at more as a projection tight end, you have to not have the production profile, but have the college.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say is, there's a ton of, look at how often the Rams used 13 personnel last year, even 12, 13 personnel. It's exploding all over the league, and there's more tight ends on the field. As an offensive coordinator, defensively too in the NFL, but as an offensive coordinator, you're always looking to create mismatches. And how can you create mismatches? Well, you can create mismatches with speed. You can create mismatches with size, with alignments in terms of, what type of role on your side of the line of scrimmage you're matching up with what type of role on the other line of scrimmage. Trying to get a running back, matched up, against a defensive end in coverage if you can, right? Trying to get a wide receiver, a speed wide receiver matched up on a linebacker so that you can, outrun him literally. There are different ways to create those mismatches. Well, when you've got tight ends in the league as athletic, as big, as freakish as they can be, there are a lot of different ways you can create mismatches with a guy like that. And I think that the league is coming into that realization more and more and more. And, watching the Rams run 3 tight ends out there all the time when they have, by all accounts, a very reliable, good backfield to be able to use, when they've got Puka Nacua, when they had Devontae Adams. I mean, they had weapons. They didn't need to have 3 tight ends out there in terms of they didn't have any other options. They were putting them out there for reasons. Okay. So, I mean, there are going to be more and more tight ends in the league that we have to pay attention to. But I think as a tight end, for my money, you have to be more often than not, unless you're some kind of absolute unicorn like George Kittle, you have to be that hybrid type that doesn't come off the field much. Here's one of my, reasons for this. Take a look last year at the top 12 tight ends in half PPR points per game. Every single one of them, with the exception of one, was also ranked in the top 17 of all tight ends in the league in terms of snap percentage, time that they were on the field. When it was possible for them to be on the field, these guys were on the field. The only guy in the top 12 in half PPR points per game who wasn't in that top 17 in the league for snap percentage was Dalton Kincaid. And Dalton Kincaid is a special case. He's used a special way by the Bills, and we kind of knew coming into the league that he was not necessarily going to fit what we think of as tight end. Otherwise, you're looking at guys like McBride. You're looking at guys like Kraft, Kittle, Goddard, Dallas Goddard, Bannon, Kelsey, Warren, Hunter Henry. You're looking at guys who don't have to come off the field necessarily based on what the situation is on the field. They don't have to come off the field because they can't block. They don't have to come off the field because they can't catch. They can be on the field, whether it's 11 personnel, whether it's 13 personnel. I don't necessarily want a guy who is locked into only being a 12 or 13 personnel type guy. I want a guy who's going to be out there all the time, because that shows me that the team has confidence in him in whatever the situation is. And it shows me that they are going to be willing to use him and move him around, because he's going to be out there in different formations and going to have to move around the formation. So I, for my money, like that hybrid type. You brought up Trey McBride. We all know he's my favorite tight end in the whole league. Not crazy about his situation going into next year, but in terms of a player, love that kind of player. Yes, George Kittle, a guy who can block, can run routes, can do everything, doesn't have to come off the field. Those are the kinds of guys in terms of, for my money, I am looking for. I don't want that. I don't want to have to be locked into hoping that an Oronde Gadsden Jr. can find the Harold Phantom type work. That's just not what I want to be looking for.
No, and I can understand that. But just to piggyback off of that idea real quick. So I didn't mention this while we were talking about the traditional inline tight end. One of the reasons that archetype gets overhyped is partly due to what you're talking about. And I know it's not what you're saying. You're talking about the hybrid tight end, which is a little bit of a different bucket and a little bit of a different animal. But people get swept up in the idea okay, yes, snaps equals playing time equals opportunity. It's not as clean slate in that logic sequence as it is for the other positions. For when you're talking about tight end, like wide receiver, absolutely. More snaps equals more routes equals more opportunity. Running backs, more snaps equals more touches equals more opportunity, right? Quarterbacks, you're the starter, you're getting all the touches. For the tight end position, more snaps is not always equal more opportunities depending upon what bucket that you fall into. And one of the most overhyped types of tight ends is the heavy inline traditional tight end, because they will get the snap counts, but they're not necessarily asked to run the routes that you're looking for. So that's where, to your point, where the hybrid tight end comes in, they will play that role and still get the routes run. George Kittle, who's kind of a unicorn in that traditional tight end bucket, will block, but he will still get the routes run. You need the combination of the two in order to kind of make it work.
And some of that is based on the offensive scheme that a guy falls into. And like we've said before, location. I mean, you can be a really good tight end, but if you're in an offense that is still not going to use you or move you around, then you might just be up a creek. And we all like Kyle Pitts under Arthur Smith. kind of thing. If they're not going to use you the right way, and it doesn't matter if you're in line, out wide, or whatever, if they're not going to use you the right way, they're not going to use you the right way. But to kind of, emphasize your point, AJ Barner for the Seahawks last year, 9th in snap percentage, just 21st in points per game. He was 14th overall because he was catching touchdowns, weirdly enough. But yeah, you need that guy who can do it all, but is not going to be just locked into that line load. I agree with that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you at his buddy Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox is on the field more than Dalton Kincaid is, and that's why is he not fantasy relevant? Well, he's not the one running the routes. Right. So let's talk about this actual tight end class a little bit. And let's get into the Kenyon Sadiq discussion of it all. Because right now, he's consensus tight end 1. And he is tight end 1 on my board. I think I was on the fantasy forum when I mentioned that it's much closer for me between my tight end 1 and my tight end 2 than I think it is for the most of the consensus out there, because I have some concerns myself. But I want to hear your guys' opinion first. So Chase, let's go with you. When we look at Kenyon Sadiq, like he's getting, I haven't seen a single mock where he doesn't go in the first round. And yes, mocks can be wrong, but it's pretty well consensus that we think Kenyon Sadiq's going to get drafted in the first round. So that's a good thing for him. Obviously, he blew everybody away in the combine. He winds up being in like the 99.5 athleticism percentile. Basically, that should make him 100%. He's the top athlete that we've pretty much seen at this position. He's masquerading as a tight end. Really, he's a wide receiver. So when you look at Kenyon Sadiq, what's your overall takeaway for his fantasy prospects?
Again, I mean, and I'm not hedging when I say this. I mean, I want to see where he goes, and I want him to go to a place that's going to use him well. But I think that it still, he didn't do a lot in college in terms of his production and his counting numbers. And I know that that's a big knock on him right now. But you got to think about it. You got to look at where Kenyon Sadiq went to college and what was going on around him during the 4 years that he was there. I mean, his first 3 seasons there, he was behind. He had Terrence Ferguson, who was a 2nd-round NFL draft pick, at the same position group on that same team. Then you want to take a look at last year. Okay, Ferguson's gone. Sadiq is the guy, and I mean, he didn't have these great counting numbers, but he still led the Oregon team in receptions. But this was a team that was kind of a super spreader offense. It was a good offense, but they were kind of a super spreader offense. They completed 313 passes in 2025. Kenyon Sadiq caught 51 of those. Okay. They had 4 other guys that caught at least 32 passes. They had 1 other guy that caught 26. Basically, they had 5 different receivers who had over 10% of the receptions on that team. Okay. Then you take a look at a guy like Eli Stowers, who is ranked by a lot of people, myself included, as their number 2 guy in this class. Well, he played for Vanderbilt, and he led that team by far in receptions. But that was a team that relied heavily on their top 3 receivers. And so even though you're talking about 2 guys who led their respective teams in receptions, Kenyon Sadiq still had over 16% of the completions on his team, compared to just over 15, almost 15.5% caught by Eli Stowers. So basically, on a team that was relying on him more heavily, Eli Stowers still didn't catch as high a percentage of his team's passes as Kenyon Sadiq did. Kenyon Sadiq was he was in a wrong place in terms of being able to put up gigantic counting numbers. I'm not worried about that as much because I want to look at what was happening around him at Oregon. He still was a starter at Oregon. That's a Final Four team in the college football playoff. It's a very good offense. It has been a good offense for most of the past quarter century. So I'm not necessarily worried about his lack of production and counting stats. And when I look at what he can do and that speed score that's off the charts, and the fact that, the dude runs a 4.39 for crying out loud. I think that he can, and on top of that, to kind of go with the conversation we were just having, and my point specifically, this is not Oronde Gadsden II Jr. This is a guy who can block and is a good blocker. He's not the biggest guy at 6'3", 245, but he's a good blocker. This is a guy who I don't think is going to have to come off the field, who is not, in my opinion, just that freak athlete. This is a guy who can be a well-rounded prospect. I'm excited to see where he goes, and I think that he warrants a first-round pick in the NFL draft, and I think that he's going to warrant a high look in your dynasty drafts because I think that his athleticism is going to translate to the NFL.
Okay. I think a lot of NFL teams agree with you. Adam, what do you make of his profile?
I like Sadiq. I think I'm a little bit lower. I have two big questions with him, and it's not the production. So let me say this first. I've talked a lot about, for me, scouting is like 3 buckets. It's your athleticism, it's your film, and then it's like the analytics side of it. Production for him, especially at tight end, I don't factor in nearly as much as I do other positions. And the reason for that is the way that tight ends get used in the collegiate level versus the way that tight ends get used in the NFL level, I think is the position where that changes over potentially the most, outside of quarterback, which is also extremely different. But just the usage of the position is so different. And the majority of offenses, it's just such an apples to orange comparison that I'm just looking for what can translate and what are these guys and what's the caliber of athlete? Because I do think kind of to Chase's points when we were talking about the archetypes, yes, you don't want a guy who's just an athlete. So you don't want the guy who's just in the super athlete bucket, but you do want someone who is an athlete and happens to fall in one of those other buckets, who is a hybrid or is a move or whatever. You want a good athlete. It's offensive line and tight end, I think, is the position where I care about relative athletic score the most. So having said all of that, when I look at Sadiq, I question the blocking a little bit more, I think, than you do. Not that I think he's bad. I think he's good relative to size is what I would give you. I don't think he is good. I think he's good relative to his size, which I think is, I don't know that you take him out of off the offense for 11, but I think you'd probably be using him more as a chip. I don't think you really want him doing too much pass blocking or being too much of your real blocking tight end. Now, chipping guys and doing that kind of thing, I definitely think you're okay with doing it. And that's just changing how your offense operates, right? And I think with how the majority of offenses operate right now, that's perfectly fine. I don't really mind that at all. And I'm also with you. I'm drafting him in the first round of Dynasty, and I'm drafting him in the first round of the NFL draft if I had that opportunity. The other thing that concerns me, though, because I think how you want to use him is very similar to Brock Bowers. I don't think he is the technician that Brock Bowers was coming out of college in any way, shape, or form. And that, to me, that is my biggest question. The athleticism is awesome. I think he's a natural catcher of the football. And I think that kind of on the blocking end, like I said, for his size, he is pretty good. And I think he's feisty with it. I think he'll put in the effort to block. All things are really good. I think you can kind of have him as that cheat guy behind the line of scrimmage to lead block. I think that'll work. I think you can use him a lot of different ways. They use Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is such an awesome route runner as well. And that was the part that I questioned with Sadiq. For a guy who in college lined up nearly 60% of the time in the slot, I would have hoped to see a little bit better of a route runner, a little bit better of a technician, someone who finds the soft spots and zones a little bit better. It's not to say he can't do it. That's not to say he's bad at it. But for a guy of his caliber, for his draft capital, I would want a little bit more personally. To me, where I land ultimately, tight end 1 for sure. Again, he's in my top 32 players ranked, right? So again, NFL draft, first rounder for sure. I personally would rather have the tier 1 receivers. I would personally rather have Love. I would personally rather have Fernandez. I think the conversation for him starts at 6. And I think some people will probably group him in with the tier 1 receivers. For me, once we get to that tier 2 of receivers, it's a toss-up. If the landing spot for a Denzel Boston or an Omar Cooper is really interesting, I might consider getting one of them before Sadiq is probably where I'm a little bit different. Versus I think a lot of people, like I said, might consider him amongst those tier 1 receivers. I consider him amongst those tier 2 receivers. So I still like him, still think he's going to be successful in the NFL. I don't think it's a seamless transition. I don't think it's perfect. but I think he's a great athlete. I think it's a great bet to make. Just some reservations.
I agree with everything you said there. I like, your take on that. Putting him with that second tier of receivers and starting the conversation around pick 6 in terms of, dynasty drafts. I don't know that necessarily makes him any different than the top overall tight end of previous years, which then to, again, bring it full circle. I mean, yeah, look at how well the top tight end in each of these last several years has done. Tyler Warren was pretty damn good. And you go back, Trey McBride is pretty damn good. And okay, yeah. So, but I agree with you that, yeah, I mean, he may get hyped by some people because he's such an athletic freak and, he's, again, Kyle Pitts syndrome. He's going to change the paradigm of the position or whatever. He is a great athlete, but I agree with you completely that, yeah, no, I'd much rather have my top level receivers. I'd much rather have Mendoza, especially in Superflex Dynasty format, which is what most of us play, or a lot of us play. And Love is the 1-1 overall if you're pushed to it. So yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, for me personally, I have 6 receivers ahead of him with Love and Mendoza.
Yeah.
But he would still be in the first round of my rookie draft because he'd probably wind up falling around. I'd say for me, it would be around like 9, pick 9, somewhere around there in the back end. And that
Can I ask you a question really quick, just while we're on that topic specifically?
Yeah.
If an extra running back was to sneak at the back end of the first round, would you take him or Sadiq? Say it's Price to the Seahawks, Price or Sadiq. I think running back with first round capital makes it interesting. I haven't made that decision for myself yet. That's kind of where my back and forth has been.
It would be close. Well, one, I don't think it's going to happen, but
I don't think so either. It's hypothetical.
In the hypothetical world that it would, yes. I mean, of course, if another running back got first round draft capital, that's something you would not be able to ignore, right? But I think I would still go with Sadiq because ultimately, no matter who that extra running back is, has a very weak profile to be a first round pick, and I would be surprised they flamed out sooner rather than not. And let's use your hypothetical of even Price to Seattle in the first round. Shaq Charbonnet's coming back in year 2.
Right.
So we're going to have that conversation. Just Jerry and Price show that he's more than just a first, second down back. So there's just a lot of things that go into it where Kenyon Sadiq, he gets, let's say it's mid first round draft capital, which right now he's going to pick 16 on the NFL mock draft database. So that's what his projected draft capital is right now. The tight ends who have been drafted in that range typically give you at least one top 12 tight end season, usually a little bit more than that. And a lot of times it'll be even somewhere in that top 8 territory. So I'm going to take that, especially for a position that, in my opinion, is hard to hit on in dynasty leagues than quarterback is, because there's usually fewer of them. They get less opportunity unless they are taken uber high. And then actually getting a guy who has the ability to be a high target earner is even more rare to be able to find. And the people who want to say like, well, I'll just wait and see if a tight end falls in my lap. You could be playing that game for years. Like you get lucky, but you could be playing that game for years. So Adam, as far as Kenyon Sadiq of it all goes, I'm more in line with you where I do have some healthy skepticism, yet he still isn't technically my tight end 1 right now on my board because he flirts with that more pure athletic bucket compared to some of the other archetype buckets that we talked about that hit a little bit more often. Specifically, when we look at featured move tight end and a hybrid type tight end. Now, his pass block rate was only 8.3%, meaning he was not asked to block a lot. So that's typically a good thing. You want to get him in there. He's on the field. He's going to go out and run a route. Cool. But he's kind of more in the baselines of that hybrid bucket. Like we're talking 16% target share. We're talking a 15.3% dominator rating and a 1.62 yards per route run. Like he's not in that upper echelon tier with the production that you saw from a Tyler Warren, that you saw from a Colston Loveland, who went in that same typical round and just looked like guys who were definitively going to hit, and they did actually wind up hitting. He looks more like a guy who's living off his athleticism, not necessarily his production, but the production profile is better than that typical just athlete freak tight end too. And talking about pass block rate, you can get afraid of that when you're an athletic tight end who gets drafted at day 3. When you're a tight end and we all expect to go in the first round, guess what? You're going to get the playing time you need to have the opportunity. So ultimately, that draft capital is the fail-safe here. Now, for my percentage buckets, he's coming in 35% total as a tight end 1. 32 of that 35% would have him projected as an elite tight end at some point in his career, with a 54% bust bucket behind that. Now, the next guy that we're going to talk about soon actually got a little bit less volatility here than Kenyon Sadiq does. But just to wrap it up on Kenyon Sadiq. So the model comps came out to, and this one's been common, Evan Ingram, right? Athleticism as a wide receiver, first round draft capital, had a very similar production profile, a little bit stronger, but about the same amount of targets and catches, and exactly the same amount of touchdowns in their last collegiate years with 8. That's the other thing about Sadiq. That 8 touchdowns definitely comes in handy for his profile. After that, you're talking about Jaheim Bell, Chika Okonkwo, Isaiah Likely, Terrence Ferguson. Those are the other guys that he winds up competing as. And those are tight ends that are interesting. Isaiah Likely had flashes. We don't know what Terrence Ferguson's going to be yet. We like Chig, but he hasn't really been in a situation where he's been able to produce necessarily on a fantasy relevant level. So outside of Evan Ingram, there's a lot of unproven or just athlete first type of tight ends showing up in his comp. Ultimately, I look at it like this. I blame the system more so than I blame Sadiq. Now, Adam, I'm with you. I don't think he's as technical of a route runner as you would like him to be for a guy who's projected to go as high as he is in the NFL draft. There's a little bit more development that's going to be involved. But I also think at the same time, it's okay that we fall a little bit back into the idea that it used to take tight ends 3 years. It doesn't all have to be hit first year or they're bust. So I think there's a little playroom somewhere in between. But I am more on the idea that, look, Oregon has had freak athlete tight ends who are good receiving prospects. They do not have an offense that's built to feature the tight end, even when they are maybe they are the best athlete on the field. They're not necessarily built in that fashion. Just look at his ADOT. His ADOT's 5.1. Are you really telling me with the athleticism that he has, he can't get open down the field for deeper throws? No. It kind of shows you a little bit what he was stuck with as far as the offense is concerned. So ultimately, draft capital and the fact that his production profile is not putrid is the reason why Sadiq, even despite my skepticism, still comes out as my number 1 tight end. With that, let's dive into Eli Stowers, because the gap for me here is close. It is really close between these two. Production profile, at least overall, as far as yards per out run, 2.55. As far as his target share, which was 22.5%. Like overall, it's more in line with that production profile of a featured tight end that hits more often, and he has the athleticism to go with it after he runs a 4.51, and his athleticism percentile winds up in the 98th percentile. So he's like right behind Sadiq pretty much when it comes to overall athleticism profile. Not too dissimilar in size, not dissimilar in pass block rate. And Stowers is even lower at 3.1%. I know there's been teams that have been talking about, they had him on top 30 visits, and they were talking about him being on top 30 visits as a wide receiver. I don't think that teams are actually going to move him over to wide receiver. He's a little bit too big bodied for that. And I do think Eli Stowers is a real chance to surprise us with draft capital. So right now his projected draft capital is kind of more in that 3rd round echelon. I do think there's a great chance he goes in the 2nd round. I think there's teams that are just not going to be able to ignore him there. So I think he'll get the draft capital you're looking for. He has the elite athleticism you're looking for, and he has the production metrics that you're looking for. So when I talked about him having a less volatile projection as far as percentile buckets go, I'm talking about 45, almost 46% as an elite tight end, 49% total as a tight end 1, 41% bust rate. He seems like he comes out in the model as a more sure thing than Kenyon Sadiq is. And it really comes as no surprise to me. And he has some similar comps as far as Evan Ingram does chop up, Terrence Ferguson does pop up. But the other comps that I like, David Njoku. And I can see a lot of David Njoku and Eli Stowers' game. Remember, Njoku was not quite the pass block or the blocker in general that he became. Stowers might be able to come that see with development down the field. But this is a guy that I think becomes even more of a sure hit, and I have him clipping Sadiq's heels as far as my big board is concerned, even though he's number 2. And again, that's a lot with draft capital. So I don't know, Chase, I go back to you. I mean, what do you make of Stowers? He's also on your tier 2 board. Is this close for you? I can't hear you, Chase.
Comparing that dude to David Njoku is a compliment, because the Chief literally burned his face off and played within days.
Well, the model can't comp for that. Okay. That's not what
that's part of what, maybe part of what I'm getting at is, I mean, there's David Njoku is a great athlete, but there's some special heart underneath that muscular chest that he has. I mean, that man he's a dog, to use an overused phrase. But Eli Stowers, I mean, keep in mind, this is a former quarterback. This is a smart individual, former quarterback who went to Vanderbilt. He's got intelligence. You know that he can translate that to the football field. And I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, in terms of an athlete, he's got everything you're looking for as a tight end. He's got everything you're looking for as a tight end. And with that former quarterback, background, and the way that in my opinion, should allow him to read defenses at the NFL level and make the correct decisions when he's asked to make those decisions. I love that about Eli Stowers. I have him as my number 2. Yeah. Biggs and Mike and possibly one of us will be talking about him on Friday night as one of the guys that went in either the second or third round. And I agree with you that I think that he's got a real chance to jump up into that second because of the profile that he fits. He's almost prototypical in terms of his physical, makeup. But then you add everything else on top of that, like you said, the athleticism, the speed score, and the overall intelligence. I think that, while I don't see the ceiling that I see with Sadiq for Eli Stowers, I can probably agree with you that the floor is probably much higher. I think there's a narrower range of outcomes for Stowers. Sadiq, he could be high, he could be low, but you're not going to be able to go wrong picking Eli Stowers in this NFL draft here if you're a tight end needy team, because I think that this kid has shown that he was willing to switch from quarterback to tight end. Outside of diva wide receivers, who probably has bigger egos than quarterbacks in the football world, right? This kid was willing to lay that aside, take on another role, something that we've seen other quarterbacks refuse to do in the past when they went to the NFL. This kid did it beforehand and actually raised himself in the profile. He's going to make himself a lot of money by being a team first type player. So I like Eli Stowers across the board. Like I said, he's my number 2 as well. And I can't disagree with anything that you said there.
Well, so Adam, for you, how big is the gap? Are you more in my lane where it's close, or you have a little bit wider gap than I talked about?
I'd say pretty close. It's a gap, like, for sure. I would have them in separate tiers if I was like tiering it out, but I would also have them 1 and 2 and both individually in their own tiers. Like, to me, the next group of tight ends is like a tier after Stowers. So that's kind of how I view it. I have him as a firm second round grade. Whereas Sadiq is kind of in that 1 to 2 for me in terms of an actual grade. Like, call it 20s to 32. But yeah, so Stowers, I like him a lot. I'm so pumped that he tested the way he did, because my concern pre-testing was like that balance of like, okay, well, I will give you grace because you did change positions, like Chase pointed out. But at the same time, you're a 24-year-old bullying other like younger players, like, candidly, right? but you came and tested, and all right, like that athleticism will actually translate. Like, it's not like, okay, you're like a 4'6" bullying on 18-year-olds. Like, you're actually like the level of athlete where I don't really care, how old you are, to be candid. So I was really stoked to see that. I think he's developed very quickly with the position change. I think that, like, he is more technically sound than Sadiq. I would give him better grades in that capacity specifically, especially when it comes to like finding soft spots in zone. I think his like lateral turns are a little bit better, specifically in route running, not saying like in testing. I don't think either of them did the 3-cone. I know Sadiq didn't. I don't know if offhand if Stowers did or not. But regardless, right? Like specifically when it comes to routes, I think I thought Stowers was a little bit sharper. So I like him a lot. I think similar roles. I think with Stowers, you're hoping that he goes to a team that runs a lot of 12 that can kind of use him as that big slot like he's been. And I think that's why you hear those teams that are talking about using him as a wide receiver, because whether he is listed in the depth chart as a wide receiver or as a tight end, he's going to be a big slot. Like that's to me, I don't really care what the designation is, because ultimately the role stays the same. He's the big body in the middle that you get, because if you come out nickel, cool, I'm going to run block the crap out of you. You come out in base, cool, I'm going to make your linebacker look like a moron and deal with it, like figure it out. So I think he's going to be really valuable. I agree with you. I think he's going to go before the 3rd round. I'm excited about Stowers.
Dan, where does he come out for you in your scoring rubric, your model? Because I mean, honestly, for my numbers, when I plugged him into my algorithm, he came out number 1 in terms of his testing scores and in terms of his metrics and his measurables. And that for me, he came out number 1, which is why I have him at number 2 behind Sadiq. Where did he come out for you, or what's your thoughts on Stowers?
You mean overall for athleticism, or because
and for your for his athleticism, and then whatever.
Well, I maybe you didn't hear me. I don't know, but I did kind of go through, or I can reiterate a little bit where he 98th athleticism score. So I have him like really 1% tier right behind Kenyon Sadiq, who was in the 99th.
You did have him. Okay, you did have him tested behind him. And athletically, yes,
right there. Athletically, he's right there. And then again, like I said, I'll just reiterate one more time. His buckets are less volatile than Kenyon Sadiq. So he actually has a higher chance of finishing as an elite tight end 1 than Kenyon Sadiq does. He came out to like a 45% chance, which was a higher chance than Sadiq even does as a tight end 1 overall. And he had a lower bust rate at 45%. So if you're going to ask, okay, well, wait, so how does Sadiq wind up being your number 1? Well, then that's where the projected draft capital comes into play, because right now we're still looking at Stowers, who's going to be right now, I think, at least a late 2nd round pick, but Kenyon Sadiq, there's really no doubt in anybody's mind he's going in the 1st round, and it may be as high as like the mid 1st round, in which case that cannot be ignored with his athleticism and the opportunity that he's likely to get. So any team that takes him there should not ask him to do stuff that he's not already going to be in position to do.
Okay, yeah, you probably got more to the heart of like, what I was wondering, because like Adam has talked about before, he's got his film grades, and then he's got his other. And that was kind of what I was getting at more is, how does Sadiq and Stowers, how do they separate themselves? I know you said it was close, but yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you.
It's real tight. And I would take Stowers right behind Sadiq as far as your rookie mock drafts go, or not even rookie mock drafts, your rookie drafts go. So I said Sadiq, I would take him at 9. I have no problem taking Stowers at 10. As far as your 1st round goes, none whatsoever. But let's talk about a couple of guys. So we had a couple other guys in our tier 2s, right? And I want to talk about some of the ones that were different amongst the group. Chase, you had Sam Rush as part of your tier 2 that me nor Adam have in our tier 2. I don't have him too much further down my list, just to be perfectly clear, but he's not in my tier 2. So talk about Sam Rush and why.
Another guy that is intelligent. I mean, he went to Stanford and has lived all over the world and done all kinds of crazy things. I mean, Sam Roush is a smart football player. And I think that will help him in his transition to the NFL. Physically 6'5", 260. He's got great size, and he's not the fastest guy at 4'7", but at the size that he's at, his athleticism still holds up for me there. What I like about Sam Roush, again, to kind of bring it again around to what we talked about at this point 40 minutes ago or 40 minutes ago or so. I don't think Sam Roush is a guy that you're going to have to pull off the field no matter what the situation is. I think that he's tough. I think that he's smart enough. I think he's a very good blocker. I think he can handle himself on the NFL level there. but I think that he also is capable and able to do the things that you want in the receiving game. He might, I hope that he doesn't get taken somewhere where he gets pigeonholed as just a blocker or just, a decoy or whatever, because I think that this kid can contribute on both, in both facets of the game here. So I really want to see that. But in terms of an overall football player, oh, heck yeah. I love this kid. And if he goes to the right situation, it will only, increase my love for him from a fantasy football standpoint. So, Sam Roush, somebody I've got my eye on late Friday night, but likely on Saturday morning. But Sam Roush, a guy that I really I want to see where he goes. And I want him to go somewhere where they know how to use a tight end and not just in 13 personnel.
This was the guy when I alluded to off the start of the show, a guy who I think is a better NFL player than how I'm going to rank him for fantasy. This is that guy where if you put GM Adam in the chair on Friday night, I'm taking him in day 2. I think he's that quality of player. But unless I think he will get pigeonholed in a team that's running a lot of 12 and a lot of 13. That is my concern. I think he would be the blocking tight end if you're running 2. Now, if you find one of the teams that run 11, like the Saints, for example, then different conversation. I think that's more interesting. But if there's multiple tight ends, I think he will get pigeonholed as the blocking tight end. And that was my concern. He is someone who broke out a little bit more as a receiver this past season, but his first couple of years at Stanford, for example, was 20+% in pass blocking. I think it was down to 9 this year. So they clearly all right, he's been around, he's paid his dues, he's ready to go catch the ball. But I don't know. Those are my concerns about him. I do think he's a heck of a football player. I think he very much so deserves to be drafted early. And I think 6 years ago, I would be right here with you, because I think at that rate of the NFL, he would have been very, very fantasy viable for me. And maybe he is. I hope he is. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, Roosh or Roush?
I've heard Roush. I don't know, though.
Okay.
I haven't checked Stanford's site, but that's what I've heard.
That's what I'm going to call him.
I'll go with Roush. I like that a little bit better anyway. With these guys, you never know until the NFL draft. And apparently, when Travis Etienne, you'll talk about
sometimes you don't know for years. Etienne. Ooh, and his brother never came out necessarily and said anything, did he?
Well, someone asked Trevor.
Yeah.
Well, Trevor's on the practice squads. I don't think Trevor's really going to pipe up anytime soon.
It's still his name.
He's like, just let me play. I don't care what you call me. As far as Roush, Adam, I'm with you. He's very much in that could fall that traditional heavy line tight end where he's out in the field and just nothing for fantasy. But the one thing that he does got going for him, and Chase alluded to this, is that he's more of an athlete than you realize, especially when you take in consideration his 6'6", 267 size. He graded out 87th percentile in my historic athleticism profile. So we're not talking about a guy who can just block. He might actually be able to give you something in that. And Adam, to your point, they did allow him to be more of a receiver, and his production profile looked a hell of a lot healthier as a result to that. I mean, we're talking about 22.5% target share, looking for the yards per out run there. I wasn't able to find that. The one thing that does stick out to me that's a little bit of a concern, and this was his first year really getting the opportunity to be in the situation, it's a 12.5% drop rate, right? So this is the first time he really gets the ball thrown to him more. Hands were a little bit suspect, and he only had 2 receiving touchdowns. And when I looked at that, I was looking at my model comps, and because I was thinking about a player in my head, and to no surprise, Mason Taylor jumps out as a player comp for this player. And I was like, yeah, that tracks. That's kind of what I had in my mind when I'm looking at the production profile right now. AJ Barner also jumps out as a model comp here for a Sam Roush. So we'll get that Roush. I like that now. So it's going to depend on where he goes to. Adam, to your point, does he get an opportunity to play with a team that's not necessarily going to look to have him play let's say the Dawson Knox role that the Buffalo Bills play, right? Are they going to allow him to be in a situation where he could have a Tyler Higbee type of season or Robert Tonyan type of season where he's able to be an aberration as far as those touchdowns are concerned, because he does have a little more athleticism while being primarily a traditional inline blocking tight end.
Because we don't talk about Higbee.
Knox, I think, is a good one, though, because Knox is actually a good receiver.
Probably a very
pigeonhole, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the thing here. Is I don't think he's a bad receiver. I think he could get pigeonholed specifically.
We have seen Knox be fantasy relevant pre-Kincaid, but we've seen that. Yeah. And he's got that ability. It's just now he's in the same room with Dalton Kincaid, who's a much better receiver and on a team that wants to throw the balls.
Sure. Let's talk about other tight ends in our tier 2. And now me and Adam are sharing this one. So Adam, I want you to fire away on him. And that's Tanner Koziol.
Yeah, I love Koziol. You want to talk about a big slot? Here's a big freaking slot. Like, you're getting 6'7" of nothing but receiving. I look, Koziol's awesome. Blocking is not his strong suit because he is not much heavier than the guys we were just talking about not being maybe the best of blockers. He's a pretty similar in weight actually to Stowers and Sadiq at 6'7", which is, maybe a little bit of a problem there, but nonetheless, I think he has the frame to fill out a little bit if a team so wants him to. But the flip side of that weight, he looks like a basketball player, like genuinely. And I know that's like, oh, tight end basketball player. Oh my God, this like crazy revelation of a combination. Well, I say that specifically. He moves way better than your typical 6'7" dude does, like laterally. Now that's not to say he's like Elijah Moore, right? But like I think cuts a lot better than your average tight end his size does. A lot better. Again, not crazy, but he does. And I think what you've seen is he's gotten a lot of production the last couple of years. And I said that I don't necessarily care too much about production of the tight end position. But what matters within that is he's gotten a lot of experience exploiting zone, winning versus different looks. Like, I actually think he's a fairly nuanced receiver. He's very much so a pure receiver. He's very much so like just going to live in that lane. He is someone who a handful of years ago I would have like virtually taken off my board because I don't think in a solo tight end team that he's really going to see the field. But I think depending on where he lands, if it's one of these teams in the Shanahan-McVay ecosystem, I think he's going to be awesome. Like, genuinely, I think he'll develop into a starter. I think even early on, like any moron coach like would figure out that he's going to be fantastic in the red zone, right? Like, it's just size alone there, I think is going to be great. I like him a lot. Just receiving ability, baby. I mentioned with specialization and how I think that is like the way for tight end right now. I think that's like the meta functionally for tight end right now. Like, he's as specialized as they come. He does one thing and he does it really freaking well. So I'm excited for him. I'm curious to see what draft capital you get. I think if it's late day 2 into early day 3, which is probably more likely. I think, by the way, I don't know what you guys think about this. I think there's going to be a crazy run on tight ends between round 3 and round 5.
There could be.
I think you might see Sadiq go. You might see like Stowers 20 picks later. And then most of the tight ends that get drafted go between like mid round 3 to mid round 5. You might see a lot of guys go because it's a lot of flavors of tight ends.
Is Tanner Koziol, is he the Oronde Gadsden II junior?
I can see it.
Class?
I mean, I liked both of them quite a bit.
Right? I loved Oronde.
They're both my guys.
Prospect. And he went to a team that didn't necessarily need to use him as a blocker. And yeah, I mean, you're talking about a guy who had 69 targets last year as a rookie on a team that threw the ball to everybody else as well. So, I mean, yeah, I could see that being a comp.
So, well, he does already. Gadsden does pop up as a comp for the model in the top 5 comps, 100%. So it could definitely be right in there. Somebody else who pops up in there, Sam Laporta pops in there. Michael Mayer pops in there. Charlie Kolar.
Laporta's a more well-rounded player, and I think Meyer's a better blocker. But
sure. Jake Ferguson also pops in there. But I know what you're getting is you're talking about guys who have bigger and still had a receiving production profile. Like, if you're going to ask me, name me one tight end who's probably be drafted in day 3 who has just fall, move tight end archetype, it's Tanner Koziol, because he has the production with the athleticism to back it up. And of course, the size is really nice. But we're talking about a guy who's 2.25 yards per route run. He had a 26.6% target share. His pass block rate was only 5.2%, and he was out in the slot 51% of the time. So he's got everything that you're looking for to kind of fall into that bucket. And in fact, my model really loves his chances to be a tight end one. I mean, for a guy who has 4th round projected draft capital as of this moment, he has nearly 27% chance to be a top 12 tight end with a 60.5% bust rate. That's really good for a guy who's talking about going in day 3 of the draft. You don't see that very often coming out of the model. So that's a big reason why he wound up in my tier 2. I'm going to talk about Max Klare real quick. And a couple of us do share Max Klare in our tier 2s. And when I put on the tape, I'm not very impressed. But I will say the model liked him a little bit better than I thought it was going to. So this is the 6'4", 246 tight end coming out of Ohio State. He falls more into the hybrid receiving tight end. So a guy who probably stays in line a little bit more than what you necessarily look for in the featured move guy, but he's not so lacking in the production profile that he kind of just gets moved and pigeonholed into a block only type of guy. He was 10% pass block rate last season, so that's not too terrible, with a 40% slot rate. So he was allowed to run routes, and one of the reasons why he does get scored as a top 4 tight end for me on my big board, even for fantasy football purposes, a lot of it winds up being teammate competition, and his wide receivers were absolutely tremendous. So there's a big reason there why his target share, let's just say, for instance, is only a 14%, why he only had 2 touchdowns, why he only had 448 receiving yards altogether. So there's things that you can point to say, okay, it explains why he doesn't have the strongest production in the world, but his athleticism profile for me winds up in the 67th percentile. And now with my athleticism percentile, it goes from 0 to 100. So anything over 65, you're starting to lean towards an above average athlete, essentially, or you're in upper echelon of the average athlete, basically, when you hit that kind of ranking. So why does he wind up getting pushed up? Well, this is the one tight end who's kind of competing with Eli Stowers as far as projected draft capital. He could go in the 2nd or 3rd round. So if he winds up going that high and he's a little more athletic than we realize, a little bit better of a receiver than we realize, but is in a position where he may not get taken off the field, I'm not saying he is Trey McBride, but he doesn't fall too far behind Trey McBride when you start putting all the pieces together. And I don't think that's what his potential and his ceiling is. Do not get me twisted. But that is somebody that we have to pay attention to from that sense. And if I could pull up his comps real fast, okay, so here we go. Mitchell Evans, Davis Allen, Jaheim Bell, Payne Durham, and Gavin Bartholomew. His comps aren't super, super awesome, but it's also going to be fluctuating depending upon what his draft capital actually winds up being. Somebody I think that should be on our radar, but I'm not over the moon excited about. Chase, what you're going to say?
Remember, too, he played at Purdue for 2.5 years, a redshirt freshman year, and then sophomore year. He played at Purdue, but that redshirt sophomore year at Purdue, this is a guy who put up 51 catches and over 600 yards receiving. This is a guy who showed that if an offense has to kind of run through him or had to kind of run through him in a D1 school, it was doing that. And then he went to Ohio State. And then, like you said, now he's competing with Carnell Tate and everybody else that's there. But yeah, I mean, I don't hold his production necessarily against him. In fact, I mean, you talk about his yards gained per team attempt, which I have found, and I think is actually a pretty important stat to look at when you're evaluating tight ends from the collegiate level. He outscores everybody on this list. So I think that Max Klare has a ton of potential. And I agree with you. Yeah, that he's right there in that 2nd tier competing with Stowers in terms of where he's going to be able to go and in this draft class. I like Max Klare's possibilities at the next level.
Yep. Can't disagree with that at all. Okay. So here's what I want to do. We each have a sleeper tight end. I want to go in order from Chase to Adam and then to myself, and we'll wrap up the show with that. So Chase, who is your sleeper tight end for this group?
Eli Raritan. And that's Adam's dude from Notre Dame. But actually, when I looked at plugged the scores in and looked at all of the metrics and the measurables and the testing and everything else. And in my model, he actually scored out number 4 of all tight ends. He scored out number 4. Now, when I watch him on tape and that, I have a few more questions about that. He's a good blocker. And I think that that's going to keep him on the field. And I said earlier, I think that if you're on the field more often than not, good things can happen for you. And it's a roll of the dice crapshoot at tight end once you get past the top 10, 12 guys anyway. So Eli Raritan, a guy that I've got my eye on and I'm hoping goes somewhere that, where he'll get an opportunity to see the field right away.
Okay. I like that one. That's somebody I've talked about in the past too. Adam, what was yours?
Yeah. So mine was Jack Endries, who I like Endries. I think he's someone who he lands in a good spot for me because I think he kind of lives as someone who on first glance probably lives in the move role. But I think he can develop into being more of a hybrid. And I think that's where he starts. I think he would start out, like if you're talking about a team that's going to be 12 and have a blocker and a receiver, I don't think he's going to get pigeonholed as the blocker, I guess is more so what I'm saying initially. But what I do think is that he can kind of land himself a hybrid gig, especially like as his career goes on and as the NFL, potentially shifts, right? We could go right back to being in a one tight end system. So someone who I think can kind of add some pounds and can kind of develop into being like a solo tight end. I think that has some value. If you have the frame to do it, you could do it long term. So I like him a lot. I think he's someone who, candidly, I think he lives as like that stereotypical boring hybrid. Like I don't want to say Dalton Schultz, but candidly, like that type of guy.
That was the name I was going to come out with.
But I think he has a little bit more juice as a receiver than that kind of guy. And I think he has a little bit of better long speed specifically than that kind of guy. I don't think he's like, the quick dude. I'm not going to say he like moves well for his size. I don't think his lateral quickness is anything special. But I think the long speed is pretty good. I think he does a pretty good job of sitting in zone. I like his ball skills. He's someone who, again, like I think can get a receiving role, the NFL level, and can kind of hang on to it. I don't think he's a special prospect, but I think he's interesting. And he's one who, like, between a lot of sleepers and a lot of tight ends in this class, like I said, I think there's going to be a lot of guys going that third to fifth round range. He's someone who I haven't heard get a lot of love, but I definitely think has his own merits kind of in that grouping.
I mean, you guys laugh, but Dalton Schultz spent multiple seasons as a top 12 tight end, so very much can fall into that category.
Yep.
Absolutely, what it boils down to. With these tight ends, a lot of it does boil down to location and years developed. Brings me to my guy, which is Michael Trigg, and I've been intrigued by Michael Trigg for the entire process, really, so far as we've gotten to this point, getting into the NFL draft. So Michael Trigg he has a stronger production profile than what the model big board kind of wants it being. So he actually comes in my tight end 6 or 7, right? Kind of like borderline right there. But he has what you're looking for as far as efficiency metrics go. He had a 2.8 yards per out run, so he's over that 2 mark. He had a decent 17.4% target share rate. He had a 4.4% pass block rate with a near 70% slot rate. So you're talking about a tight end who very much played like a big slot, has your what I would consider now to be prototypical tight end size, 6'4", 240. There seems to be more and more of those guys really starting to pop up here. And his projected draft capital is going to be in that 4th, 5th round territory that we're talking about. So location is going to be very much key. Very much grades out as an average athlete overall for his size adjusted speed scores in the profile, about 51 athleticism percentile, which is smack in the middle really of the average percentile for me. His comps aren't the best, but there are some that pop. So one would be like Bryson Hopkins, which, a lot of people got excited about, never really produced into anything. Another one would be Braden Willis, who was drafted probably higher than he should have ever been. But then you talk about Kobe Parkinson, who we were intrigued by. I think he's just getting a lot of the crowd noise now being with the Rams. And Arondé Gatz and Mason Taylor make an appearance here as far as those top 5 comps go too. So we're talking about a range in which he should be considered in fantasy football territory. And so Michael Trigg, we'll see where he winds up going, but there's a lot of things in his overall production profile. And what really kind of impresses me about it is not just his efficiency and not just the fact that he had the opportunities to run these routes, but you're talking about a tight end who had an 11.3 ADOT and a 4.8% drop rate. Like, he was getting targeted down the field, catching the ball securely, and being efficient as a wide receiver. So that's kind of what I'm looking for when I'm talking about a later round type tight end.
Where did you have him ranked overall, Dan? Among tight ends?
I have him, I gotta double check that. Either 6th or 7th. I have him 7th right now. I have him one spot behind a tight end we didn't get to talk about in Justin Jolly.
I had him 5th, right ahead of Jolly. So yeah,
Okay.
I liked him too. I left him for you to talk about because I wanted to talk about Raritan. But yeah, no, I like everything that Trigg brings to the table there. I agree with you on all those counts. He's straight out of Central Casting. I hope he goes somewhere that will coach the tight end position and not just have a tight end position.
Well, it's key because when you're talking about him potentially being a day 3 pick, he's also the type of tight end who doesn't necessarily have a single trait, whether it be blocking or athleticism or receiving wise, that's going to stick out enough where he'll definitively earn playing time. He's going to have to fall into a right opportunity. And that's where it gets real Jekyll and Hyde with some of these tight ends that you're talking about getting drafted in that range. So it makes it kind of tough. It's why his bust bucket is over 76%. He's got a wide range of outcomes. Yeah,
he's got a wide range of outcomes. Yep.
That's going to wrap it up for the show, though. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Make sure you're downloading Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app and check out our video content when you go to the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. Don't forget, 7:30 Eastern, we will be live on the Fantasy Sports Advice Network YouTube channel, giving you your first round draft stream, these 3 amigos right here. So it'll be lots of fun. We'll have lots of guests. We'll have some bets. We'll have some picks, fantasy reactions, NFL reactions, all of it in between. And guys, be good till then.